Hi, everybody. Good morning. I am Kelly Coyle-Crevelli from Penguin Random House. As always, we are so happy that you joined us this morning. This is an incredibly special episode for us, and it's number 15. And I know we've said this to you before, but we started doing these programs back in April when the world shut down, and we thought it would be a nice way to communicate with all of you. And we thought, I was just telling our guest Rhonda that we thought we would be doing, a handful of these episodes, and then we'd be back to work or back into the office. And now we're on episode 15 already. And you've joined us every week, or a lot of you have joined us every week, or viewed the archives, and we really appreciate that. So I just wanted to say good morning, let you know that we have a couple of special guests for you today. We will end this very special episode with Kevin Young. Will be doing a talk for us, so stay tuned for him. I wanted to also remind you that we have Erica, my colleague Erica Melnichuk, is answering any questions you might have in the Q&A box. And I just wanted to welcome you. This is going to be a really wonderful episode where we're going to be celebrating voices, music, art of the African American culture. As a reminder, I will let you know that I think every week what we have noticed about, or what we've appreciated most about these buzzes, is the ability, as you know, that books really do bring people together. And so most of the time, or a lot of the weeks, we focus on debut novels or some thrillers or beach reads and fiction. And this week is going to be all nonfiction, all celebrating what unites us, and that, and through books. And it's, what unites people: food, music, art, but most of all, individual human experiences are what unite everybody. And so this is going to be a celebration of that. It's a very special day for me for the number of reasons. And number one is because we're doing this event today. And number two, it's because for the first time since March, I'm actually in New York City. I have an event later in Bryant Park, and so I'm using their offices right by the beautiful Bryant Park. Hopefully, I'm not sure if anybody knows, you can let me know in the comments section if the shop is open in the New York Public Library, because I do miss spending money there. So I am going to try to go there after. But it's a special day for me because I miss New York so much, and I can't wait to get back here and see all of you in person again. But until then, here we are to celebrate these wonderful titles, and a reminder that, books do unite us as people and as librarians and as readers. So Miriam, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, hi there. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you're here to join us for, again, this very special celebration. For me, it's the meeting of libraries and publishing and the rich relationships that we have. I am so honored to introduce our special guest here from the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. Rhonda Evans is the Assistant Chief Librarian of the Jean Blackwell Hutson Research and Reference Division of the Schomburg. She supports the management of the Research and Reference Division's diverse collections that focus on people of African descent throughout the world. With Frank Calarius of the Jefferson Market Library, she co-hosts the New York Public Library's very, 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 very popular podcast about books, culture, and what to read next. That is, The Librarian is In. Prior to joining the Schomburg Center, Rhonda served New York Public Library as an electronic resources librarian and as an adult services librarian as well. One of the 2019 recipients of the New York Public Library Leadership Award. She is also an active member of the Black Caucus of American Library Association. Please welcome Rhonda. She is here to take us behind the scenes on a virtual tour of the Schomburg Center and speak about its history, mission, special holdings, and services.
Thank you, Miriam, and thank you, Penguin Random House, for inviting me today to speak about the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. I'm very excited to tell you about it today. So as you see here on this first slide, this is the entrance to the Schomburg Center, which I hope if you're ever in New York, one day you will get to come and see. Next slide, please. So the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture is part of the New York Public Library system. So the New York Public Library has 88 branches, but it also has 3 research libraries. And one of the research libraries is probably very familiar to you, the Stephen A. Schwarzman building. It's very famous for its lions in the front. Some people like to call it the Ghostbusters Library, but it's right in front of Bryant Park. The other research library is the Library for the Performing Arts, which is located in Lincoln Center right next to the Metropolitan Opera. And then we have the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, which is located in Harlem. Next slide. So I'd love to tell you a little history about the Schomburg Center. So way before it even became a research center, it actually started as a branch of the New York Public Library, the 135th Street branch, also known as the Harlem branch. But then in the 1920s, the demographics in Harlem began to change drastically from a majority Jewish neighborhood in New York to a Black neighborhood, which was part of the Great Migration North and also migration within the New York City. So there began to be this demand for more literature and materials related to Black culture because of the demographics in Harlem. So in 1925, the Division of Negro Literature, History, and Prints was established at the 135th Street branch. And you can see the reading room here with, in the very back is the very first Black librarian at the New York Public Library. Her name is Catherine Latimer. And in 1926, the division purchased the collection of Arturo Alfonso Schomburg, which became the foundation of the Schomburg Center's collections. Next slide. So Arturo Alfonso Schomburg is a very important figure in the history of Black librarianship. So he was a Puerto Rican-born Black scholar and bibliophile. And in 1925, he wrote an essay entitled "The Negro Digs Up His Past." And he spoke about what's called vindicating evidences. And as a child, he asked one of his teachers about Black history, about history of culture of the African diaspora. And that teacher told him that that didn't exist, that there was no history of Black people and that they made no contribution to history. So he made it his purpose in life to collect what he called vindicating evidences, proving the historical contribution of Black people. And so that is the foundation of our collection today. And that collection included 5,000 books, 3,000 manuscripts, 2,000 etchings and paintings, and several thousand pamphlets. And there are some of the items there are priceless. For example, a book by the 18th century Haitian writer Pompey Vallotton Bastet, first edition poetry books by Phillis Wheatley, slave narratives. So his collection of things that he brought together for these vindicating evidences has been the foundation of what we have today and has been a very important part in scholarship for Black culture. Next slide, please. So you can't really talk about the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture without talking about the Harlem Renaissance, because the Schomburg Center began to really build its name in Harlem in the 1920s, which was when the Harlem Renaissance began to come alive and began to really happen, and the Schomburg Center played a really important part in that. I have Zora Neale Hurston here, and she was actually a close acquaintance of Arturo Schomburg and was able to view a lot of his items before it was given over to the Schomburg Center. If you go through our Schomburg Center archives and look at the letters between the librarians at the time and the patrons and the artists and the writers that they were working with, you'll see letters between poets such as Countee Cullen, and the branch right next to the Schomburg Center is named after Countee Cullen, letters and contributions from Alain Locke, from W.E.B. Du Bois, and Nella Larsen. And the interesting story about Nella Larsen, who was a well-known writer of the Harlem Renaissance, she wrote Passing and Quicksand. She was actually a librarian at the New York Public Library and a librarian at the 135th Street branch. So she has that connection as well. Next slide, please. And of course, Langston Hughes has a very important connection to the Schomburg Center. You see this image here, this photograph here of Langston Hughes at the Schomburg Center with Jean Blackwell Hutson, the namesake of my division, and who was also the head librarian for many years at the Schomburg Center. And we have many of his papers at the library. And one of the most important things with our relationship with Langston Hughes is if you see this other photograph of the Schomburg Center lobby, it's called the Langston Hughes lobby. Right in the middle there, you see the river's cosmogram. And underneath that cosmogram, we have Langston Hughes ashes. So he is literally with us at the Schomburg Center. And it's really funny because every time I take people on tours and they're standing on this cosmogram and I tell them that we have Langston Hughes ashes interred there, they automatically jump off the cosmogram out of respect. But another interesting story, and if you could go to the next slide, please. This is a really wonderful photograph of Maya Angelou, whose archive we have at the Schomburg Center, and the poet Amiri Baraka dancing on the cosmogram. There was a celebration for Langston Hughes at the Schomburg Center, and a band struck up a song, and the two of them started dancing. And as many people say, it was a wonderful way to honor Langston Hughes' memory. This photo was taken by Chester Higgins for the New York Times, and it's something that always, you know, when people see it, always brings them joy. Next slide, please. And for any of you who may be stamp collectors or follow these type of things, just recently in March 2020, the USPS issued a series of stamps called The Voices of the Harlem Renaissance. And two people, of course, Arturo Schomburg, the namesake of the Schomburg Center, was one of the subjects of these stamps, Nella Larson and Elaine Locke and Ann Spencer, who all have connections to the Schomburg Center. Next slide, please. So I've told you a little bit about the history of the Schomburg Center. So now I want to tell you a little bit about what kind of things that you can find today as a patron or a visitor or someone who's just simply interested in the Schomburg Center or what we have to offer. So the Schomburg Center has 5 different research divisions. One of our research divisions is our Manuscripts, Archives, and Rare Books division. So this division holds all types of unpublished material. And one of the jewels of this division is the Lapidus Center for the Historical Analysis of Transatlantic Slavery. So anyone who's interested in researching the history of slavery, there are amazing type of archival documents there. There are huge insurance ledgers for when they would insure slaves coming through the transatlantic crossing. There are bills of sales. There's all types of letters and documentation and slave narratives and all types of really interesting and priceless items. There is the archive of Malcolm X. And of course, Malcolm X was very closely related to Harlem. And so his archives are wonderful, and it includes video, it includes his journals, it includes his diary. More recently, we acquired the archive of Maya Angelou. Before that, we acquired the archive of James Baldwin. And then the most recent archival addition is Harry Belafonte. And in the basement of the Schomburg Center, we have the American Negro Theater, which is a theater where many Black actors from Harry Belafonte, Ruby Dee, and Ossie Davis also received their start. So he has a very close relationship to the Schomburg Center as well. Next slide, please. We have the Moving Image and Recorded Sound Division. And this is a really great division that documents Black history through film, through music, through audio recordings, through spoken word. And again, some of the really great archives that we have in there is Sonny Rollins, for those of you who love music, Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis, that had a really, really expansive collection of their films, their audio recordings, records of them reading books. Wonderful. Oscar Michaud, the very well-known Black filmmaker from the 1920s. More recently, Fab Five Freddy, for people who really enjoy hip-hop. And if you can see in this photograph, there's a really great collection of LP covers. There's over 25,000 albums, 500 rare 16-millimeter newsreels, there's documentary and dramatic films. It's a really wonderful archive. Next slide, please. Then we have our photographs and prints division. And this is probably one of our most popular divisions because it allows people to visually see the history of Harlem and the history of Black people, mostly in the United States, but across the world, from covering all time periods of photography. So there are over 300,000 images that range from the mid-18th century graphics to contemporary documentary and art photography. So there is photography of Walker Evans, Chester Higgins Jr., Gordon Parks, James Vanderzee, and Carl Van Vechten, who took amazing, wonderful photographs of the Harlem Renaissance. And here's just one example of a very early photograph of Harlem in the early 1900s. Next slide, please. We have an art and artifacts division, and we are actually the only library at the New York Public Library System that still collects actual art pieces. And some of the great artworks that we have there is we have many sculptures by the sculptress Augusta Savage. We have paintings by Romare Bearden. So art and artifacts includes different artifacts as well. For example, tennis rackets and tennis wipes by Althea Gibson. African American painting and sculpture from the Harlem Renaissance, the WPA and Black arts movements, and then of course items such as traditional masks, adornments, different items from different parts of Africa, and then very interesting things such as posters. There are over 4,000 posters covering from the civil rights to the Black Lives Matter movements. There's a large button collection, especially from the Black Power movement. So you can find all kinds of interesting artifacts and artwork in our Art and Artifacts division. And again, this is all open to the public. Next slide, please. And here we finally come to the division where I work, which is the Jean Blackwell Hutson Research and Reference Division. And that's our reading room you can see right there. And at the top, you'll see some beautiful murals created by Aaron Douglas. And when you come to the Schomburg Center, most likely we are your first stop. We have all types of published materials. Our materials cover people of African descent throughout the world. And again, we mostly concentrate on the humanities, the social sciences, and the arts. Geographically, the collection emphasizes mostly the Americas, the Caribbean, and sub-Saharan Africa. Next slide, please. And I just want to give you an idea of some of the type of things that you can find in our research and reference division. So one of our kind of biggest, most popular collection is our collection of newspapers. So we have historical and current newspapers covering African American culture, Caribbean newspapers, African newspapers, from times of slavery all the way up to the present day. So you can see, newspapers today from all different countries of Africa. But we also have hundreds and hundreds of magazines, of pamphlets, of travel guides. We have the largest run of the Green Books, as well as other different travel guides. We have serials, we have rare titles. We even have a very, very large comic book collection, which is really popular and we like to display during our Black Comic Book Festival every year. African American history and scholarship is, of course, comprehensive, and we have lots and lots of literature. So we have fiction, poetry, drama from Black writers around the world and in all different types of language. And we even collect a large collection of self-published materials as well. So we have substantial texts on Harlem. So Harlem, of course, is one of our strong suits, collecting it since the early 1900s, and Blacks in the performing and visual arts. We have lots of historical books, books on West Indian history and culture, and then we have very special collections, for example, documents on African American Greek letter societies, doctoral dissertations, and we have a huge clipping file of newspaper clippings covering over 9,000 subjects. So there's really, you can kind of find any type of published material you can think of covering the Black diaspora, you can find in our division. Next slide, please. So Unfortunately, the Schomburg Center, as many of your libraries might be at this time, are closed due to COVID-19. And before I get into accessing the Schomburg Center remotely, one of the things that I do want to say is that when we are open to everyone. A lot of people see that we have these very special archives, these very old things, these priceless artworks, but they are there for research, they are there for scholarship, so anyone can come and request and see these items. So if you're working with a patron who's doing this type of research, or you're interested in this type of research yourself, anyone is allowed to come and view these things. But while we're closed, you still have access to the Schomburg Center and our collections remotely. So the first remote way to access the Schomburg Center is the New York Public Library Digital Collections. And I have the URL right there, digitalcollections.nypl.org. And you can search by division, but there are thousands and thousands of items in the digital collections that you can view. So, for example, the entire collection of the Green books are in there. The Green books have become very popular lately. There was a movie, The Green Book, a while ago, but there's been a few books that have come out about it. And if you are interested in seeing those, you can see them beautifully digitized. You can see artwork from our Art and Artifacts division, including some of the murals from Aaron Douglas. If you're interested in some of the archival documents, lots of those documents are in the digital collection. And of course, you can see thousands and thousands of wonderful photographs from our Photographs and Prints division. And again, there's just an example down there from our big theater division that we have at the Schomburg Center. So the digital collections is a really great way. It's very easy to use. It'll have the copyright permissions on there for anything that you're interested in. So I highly recommend you go there and explore. Next slide, please. So we have the digital Schomburg. The best way to access this is to Google Digital Schomburg. And when you see that, you'll see that there's lots of online exhibitions that have been created using the Schomburg Center collections over the years. This screenshot here is one that I provided called Black New Yorkers, but there are some that are 19th century African American women writers, all types of different online exhibits that you can view from the Schomburg Center by looking at the digital Schomburg page. Next slide, please. So many of you are librarians, so I'm sure you are familiar with LibGuides, and the Schomburg Center has some really great research guides and LibGuides that are available for people to use that showcase the Schomburg Center. One of our most popular ones, created by my colleague in the Jean Blackwell Hutson Research and Reference Division, A.J. Muhammad, created this African American Theater Guide, which is such a great guide that encompasses our collections, but it also includes collections from the Library for the Performing Arts. So it's a really wonderful guide if you're interested in theater. Another example I have here is another colleague of mine, Tracy Crawford, just released this guide on quilts of the African diaspora. And again, it's a really fun guide, very visually appealing, showing all types of resources on quilting. Since we just had the centennial of the suffragette movement, there's a wonderful Black feminist reading guide, Schomburg LibGuide that we have. So if you go to libguides.nypl.org/Schomburg, I have the URL right there, you can see all of the LibGuides that we have. And of course, if you are a New York Public Library card holder, you can access many of the articles and databases that we have available. And again, that's another excellent way to access our collections because many of our collections have been included in these databases. For example, the NAACP papers and many African American newspapers you can access through the databases. So I just put the URL there as well, or you can just Google NYPL articles and databases. Next.
We'll send all this out after too, just so nobody feels the need to scribble all these URLs down. We'll send it out. Yep.
That's wonderful. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to finish up here, and I just want to say that unfortunately I cannot show you every wonderful thing that the Schomburg Center has to offer you. So I really encourage you all to go to schomburg.org. And some of the things that you might want to look out for when you visit our website is we have lots and lots of virtual events that are happening. When we were open, we always had things happening in our library, but now we've created them virtually. Lots of different author talks from people who have done research at the Schomburg Center. We have wonderful education programs, the teen curators, the junior scholars, and they have been putting up wonderful curated art exhibits that you can look at, and then just to see all types of wonderful blog posts and things that our librarians have been creating. And these are two of my wonderful colleagues, Adrian Mohammed, a reference librarian, and Myra Lariano, who is our Associate Chief Librarian in the Jean Blackwell Hutson Research and Reference Division. So I hope that I have made you excited about learning a little bit more about the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, that you will reach out to us with any questions that you have, and that you will visit our website. And when we are able to welcome patrons back into the building again, that you will come and visit us. So thank you very much.
Rhonda, that was amazing. Thank you so much. We're so deeply appreciative of the Schomburg Center and the collective work of its staff, including librarians, archivists, writers, curators, the educators, everyone. And we certainly encourage all of today's attendees to visit this this very, very special institution, which is a public research library and cultural institution. Since the library is currently closed, of course, to check out some of its resources remotely, all of the ones that Rhonda has mentioned that you have access to, as well as some timely ones for Reader's Advisory, such as the publication of the Black Liberation reading lists that are available. Yes, these reading lists are available for adult readers and also for youth. So, please check that out. And Rhonda, you are amazing, and I want to encourage folks to certainly tune in to the Librarian is in podcast at NYPL. Some amazing reads that both you and Frank share, and you've also had some really wonderful episodes. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Rhonda, that really was so fun. And a lot of the comments were asking about if you could view the contents of the Schomburg digitally right now. So thank you for addressing that. And we've gotten a lot of people that said that the next time they come to New York, that's on their list. So that was really wonderful. So thank you so much. That was so fun.
Thank you.
What incredible work you're doing there. And we thank you so much for joining us today. That was really fun.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, sure. And so just so everybody knows, we did tell Rhonda that she could turn off her camera so she could have some privacy. Or if you have to leave, we promise we won't be offended. We obviously know you have a lot of work to do. So thank you so much. That was really fun. Miriam, that will be on our list when we get to go back to the office. You have to take me there so we can go together. So next up from us, before we hear from Kevin Young, is going to be a presentation of some titles that are further going to celebrate the lives and the culture of African American history and all sorts of things. And again, we just thank you for joining us. And this is a really fun presentation for us to do too. So bear with me while I have a minute of technical problem. Hold on. Let's see. My slides are not moving. Hold on. Here we go. Let's see. What happened to my slides?
Oh, for some reason,
You're doing it? Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, you know what? One second. I can, sorry, this is what happens when I can do it, Miriam.
I know you can.
No. Oh, you know what? Oh, I got it. Sorry, we've become WebEx technology experts in the last couple of months. So thank you. So just again, you know that you've been with us before. You see the codes, the keys on the titles will tell you what formats the books are available in. And so now on to the fun part, on to the books. First, we just want to remind you about our virtual author events this week. You can find all of the ones that are coming up now. We've got a great, the What Now, an anti-racist teach-in. There's more nights coming this week. You can find out more information at the URL below. And again, this will be sent out in the wrap-up. And we are, continuously trying to keep the reading community together until we can all get back together in life. So there's some wonderful events for that. Okay, so our first slide is a celebration of the census. This is a very exciting slide. I will say that this slide does make me a little bit hungry, although the very first thing I did when I got to New York was buy myself the biggest bagel I could find. And I shouldn't be hungry, but I still am. So the first book I want to talk about is Sweet Home Cafe, a celebration of African American cooking. Since the 2016 opening of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, its Sweet Home Cafe has become a destination in and of its own. Showcasing African American contributions to American cuisine, the cafe offers favorite dishes made with locally sourced ingredients, adding modern flavors and contemporary twists on classics. Now both readers and home cooks can partake of the cafe's bounty, drawing upon traditions of family and fellowship strengthened by shared meals. Sweet Home Cafe Cookbook celebrates African American cooking through recipes served by the cafe itself and dishes inspired by foods from African American culture. I can't stop talking about it without telling you some of the recipes in here. So there is fried green tomatoes, everyone's favorite, Jamaican grilled jerk chicken, fried chicken and waffles, yum, chocolate chess pie, banana pudding, all sorts of really biscuit recipe, all sorts of nice hearty meals for you to enjoy. So that is Sweet Home Cafe Cookbook. Next up, there's somebody always has to remind you of the healthy side of life, and so Afro Vegan does just that, and it's named one of the best vegetarian cookbooks of all time. So I think it's an essential one for the library. It has more than 100 modern delicacies and delights. It draws on personal memories and the history of food that has traveled from the African continent, all over the African continent. Collard green and cabbage with lots of garlic. That's the name of the recipe. That sounds so good. Crispy teff and grit cakes with eggplant. Caribbean-inspired cocoa spice cake with crystallized ginger and coconut chocolate ganache. I mean, how hungry does that make you? Next book for us is Jubilee, which is recipes from 2 centuries of African American cooking. This is adapted from historical texts and rare African American cookbooks. The 125 recipes of Jubilee paint a rich, varied picture of the true history of African American cooking, and it's a cuisine far beyond soul food. This is Tony Tipton Martin, the first African American food editor of a daily American newspaper, is the author of the James Beard Award-winning The Jemima Code, A History of African American Cooking, found in and between the lines of 3 centuries worth of African American cookbooks. Tipton Martin builds on that research in Jubilee, adapting recipes from those historical texts for the modern kitchen. What we find is a world of African American cuisine made by enslaved master chefs, free caterers, and Black entrepreneurs and culinary stars. That goes way beyond soul food, and it's cuisine that was developed in the homes of the elite and the middle class, and that take inspiration from around the globe. That is a diverse, varied style of cooking that has created much of what we know as American cuisine. So Jubilee is definitely a book with starred reviews from Publishers Weekly and Booklist. So now we move on to the celebration of the other sense, and that is music, which my colleagues always make fun of me because every time we go anywhere to any city, I always say I want to see jazz, and they make fun of me for saying it that way, but I love jazz, and this book, The Art of Jazz, is a visual history, so I can see jazz, but it is one of my favorite things to do is to listen to great jazz music. It just makes you feel so at home, and it makes you feel comfortable and happy wherever you are. So The Art of Jazz explores how the expressionism and spontaneity of jazz spilled onto its album art, posters, and promotional photography, and even inspired standalone works of fine art. Everyone knows jazz is on the cutting edge of music, but how much do you know about its influence in the visual arts? With album covers that took inspiration from the avant-garde, jazz's primarily African-American musicians and their producers sought to challenge and inspire listeners both musically and visually. It's arranged chronologically. Each chapter covers a key period in jazz history from the earliest days of the 20th century to today's postmodern jazz. It has over 300 images, and it is a significant contribution to literature in this form. So we are super excited about that book that comes out, I think, next month, October. Ebony covering the first 75 years, is a celebration of the treasure trove of Ebony magazine's history, glamorous covers, groundbreaking cultural impact, and the authentic coverage of the past 75 years of Black American life. Ebony magazine has been a cultural arbitrator and a staple in Black households in America since its first issue in November of 1945. Founded by John H. Johnson, Ebony reported on and continues to chronicle every aspect of life from fashion to civil rights, entertainment, and cooking, and it has become the authoritative perspective for and about the Black community. This is curated by Ebony's publisher and president, LaVale Levette. This all-out feast of a book is packed with exclusive contributions by a host of celebrities, influencers, and cultural icons, including Beyonce, Will Smith, Samuel L. Jackson, Snoop Dogg, Magic Johnson, and Eddie LaBerge. And it features over 600 covers and photographs. It's going to be a beautiful book and with so much history. Oh, you know what? I just remembered. I do have some spreads of all these books. I totally forgot. We don't usually do it this way, but visually, we really wanted to.
Oh, have you? I believe. I hope it's been working for folks.
Nope, it probably has. So I just don't see which one you're up to. So are you up to Odette? Odetta?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, I didn't realize. I'm sorry. Okay, so Odetta, let me just take a little sip of water. Okay, so I'm excited to talk about Odetta last because when I was doing my notes for this presentation this week, the author has a list of the 5 Odetta hits that he listened to while he was writing this book. And so there's a list of his playlist there. But I was listening to some Odetta songs while I was doing my notes, and I was like just mesmerized by her music. And I think I cried a couple of times. I just think that her music just is so strong and so powerful. And she's such a wonderful woman and such a presence of bringing people together through her songs. And so I'm so happy to introduce this book to you that came out in the spring when, maybe you may have missed it because, this is when we were all very distracted. But it's the first in-depth biography of the legendary singer and voice of the civil rights movement, who combated racism and prejudice through her music. Odetta channeled her anger and despair into some of the most powerful folk music the world has ever heard, and that really is true. Through her lyrics and an iconic persona, Odetta made lasting political, social, and cultural change. She was a leader of the 60s folk revival and one of the most important singers of the last 100 years. Her music has influenced a huge number of artists over the many decades, including Bob Dylan, Janis Joplin, the Kinks, Jewel, and more recently, even Rihanna and Miley Cyrus. Through interviews with Joan Baez, Judy Collins, Carly Simon, and more, Zach brings Odetta back into the spotlight, reminding the world of the folk music that powered the civil rights movement and continues to influence generations of music today. This has a starred review from Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, and Booklist, and it is such a timely biography. I highly recommend you put her YouTube mix on and just listen to it for the rest of the day. It's so inspiring, and she's just such a wonderful singer and just a wonderful person that just brought so much joy to life. And she was at the March on Washington. She was in Montgomery. She just was involved in everything, and she was there. And through all of it, her music just touched so many lives. And when you hear people talk to her, when they interview her, you can just tell that they are so honored and so grateful to have met her and worked with her. So I highly recommend this biography for your collection. Miriam, are you going to try to do your slides for you?
Sure, if you don't mind driving.
Now, is it moving for you?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So there's the Odetta, there's the top 5 songs, but my favorite one was she does This Little Light of Mine. It makes you cry. So that's how I started my day today. All right, here you go, Miriam.
Yeah, and now we're going to be talking, we're going to be celebrating a number of very important Black voices. Our first book will be In Black Futures, and editors Kimberly Drew and Jenna Wortham ask, what does it mean to be Black and alive right now? In answering this very existential question, they open a prismatic vision of possibilities through the curation of an evocative collection of full-color art and text, from photography and poetry to original artwork and essays. And they also explore a wide range of contemporary topics, including body politics, global interconnectivity, social activism, digital identity, and community. The contributors to this book include acclaimed journalists like Wesley Morris and Nicole Hannah-Jones, Oscar-winning director Ezra Edelman, star designer Duro Oluwu, curator Thelma Golden, essayist Samantha Irby, and a host of visual artists and many more. Our next book is The Chiffon Trenches by legendary style icon Andre Leon Talley. And from the pages of Vogue to the runways of Paris, this book is a deeply revealing memoir that captures the fashion world from the inside out in its most glamorous and most cutthroat moments. Talley was the indomitable creative director at Vogue during the magazine's rising dominance as the world's fashion Bible. And over 5 decades, his byline has also appeared in Vanity Fair, HG, Interview, and Women's Wear Daily. He has published several illustrated works, including Little Black Dress, ALT 365+, and Oscar de la Renta, His Legendary World of Style. He received a MA in French Studies from Brown and has served on the Board of Trustees for the Savannah College of Art for Art and Design for 20 years. This is an incredible read that it also touches on history, and I love that intersection. There's a great blurb from Dr. Janice Mays of Syracuse University, who writes, Talley is a preeminent fashion historian of his generation. His rare quality of mind and the depth of his knowledge infuse the chiffon trenches of his legendary career with a spirited voice, for sure, keen sensibility, and cultural intellect. The polysonic narrative incorporates histories of styles and collections, reveals fashion politics imbued with racism, power plays, fears, and ignorance, and describes with compelling honesty the impact of these forces on his Black body. I can't stop thinking about this book. I read it many moons ago, and I hope you'll consider picking it up. Our next title is The Black Book, and this is a new edition of the classic New York Times bestseller that's edited by Toni Morrison, offering an encyclopedic look at the Black experience in America from 1619 through the 1940s. When Toni Morrison was a senior editor at Random House, she worked with 4 prominent collectors of Black memorabilia to develop this extraordinary scrapbook of more than 500 images detailing the rich cultural and social history of African Americans from the era of the transatlantic slave trade through the start of the civil rights movement. And now, as our nation marks the 400th year anniversary of the first enslaved Africans' arrival on these shores, the Black Book returns in print in hardcover, featuring its original jacket design. In Love is the Way, Bishop Michael Curry invites you and readers to walk the path of love with one of the warmest spiritual leaders of our time, and to learn about how faith can be put into action. This is a book that's for readers of inspirational and accessible Christian and spiritual titles, uh, like those by Timothy Keller and T.D. Jakes. As the descendant of slaves and the son of a civil rights activist, Bishop Michael Curry's life illustrates massive changes in our times. Much of the world met Bishop Curry when he delivered a sermon on the redemptive power of love at the royal wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle at Windsor Castle. Here he expands on his message of hope in an inspirational roadmap for living the way of love, illuminated with moving lessons from his own life. He is the presiding bishop and primate of the Episcopal Church, and elected in 2015. Reverend Curry is the first African American to lead the denomination. He was previously Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of North Carolina, a noted advocate for human rights, and author of several books. He is recognized as one of the most popular preachers in English language. Next, we have Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own, by the James S. McDonald Distinguished University Professor at Princeton University, Eddie S. Cloud, Jr. James Baldwin grew disillusioned by the failure of the civil rights movement to force America to confront its lies about race. In the era of Trump, what can we learn from his struggle? We live, according to Dr. Cloud, in the after times, when the promise of Black Lives Matter and the attempt to achieve a new America were challenged by the election of Donald Trump. We have been here before. For James Baldwin, the after times came in the wake of the civil rights movement, when a similar attempt to compel a national confrontation with the truth was answered with the murders of Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr. In these years, spanning from the publication of The Fire Next Time in 1963 to that of No Name in the Street in 1972, Baldwin was transformed into a more overtly political writer, a change that came at a great professional and personal cost. In the story of Baldwin's Crucible, Cloud suggests we can find hope and guidance through our own aftertimes, this Trumpian era of shattered promises and white retrenchment, mixing biography drawn partially from newly uncovered interviews with history, memoir, and a trenchant analysis of our current moment. Begin Again is Cloud's attempt, following Baldwin, to bear witness to the difficult truth of race in America today. And next we have The Measure of Our Lives, A Gathering of Wisdom. This is an inspirational book that juxtaposes quotations, one to a page, drawn from Toni Morris's entire body of work, both fiction and nonfiction, from The Bluest Eye to God Help the Child, from Playing in the Dark to The Source of Self-Regard, all to tell the story of self-actualization. It aims to evoke the totality of Toni Morrison's literary vision. Of this book, Barack Obama writes, Toni Morrison was a national treasure, as good a storyteller, as captivating in person as she was on the page. Her writing was a beautiful, meaningful challenge to our conscience and our moral imagination. The foreword is written by Zadie Smith. That's it for me.
Thank you, Miriam. So the last thing that we want to share with you today, and thank you for listening to us talk about some of those wonderful books. They are the reason why we gathered, is to talk about the books. And so to find out more about the lives of the people behind the books is another special treat. for us, and I'm sure for you. And we were going to present the African American poetry book by Kevin Young, 250 Years of Struggle and Song from the Library of America. But we really thought that Kevin Young would do a better job than us, so we asked him to do it. He accepted, and so we have a wonderful talk for you now. Miriam does ask him some really wonderful questions, and so we hope that you will listen to it and enjoy it. And we just wanted to put on the slide this wonderful review from Booklist, a profound and affirming pleasure to read and an imperative resource for every public library. I mean, perfect review. There has been so much effort and so much work put into this book, and so we are so excited to bring you Kevin's perspective. And when we send out the wrap-up report, we're going to add into it a PowerPoint that comes from the Library of America that will show you places where where grants have been given out for a further partnership with the Library of America to promote this book even further with what is the word I'm looking for? When you do like a display, in the library, and it'll show you some of the work that went behind it, and just so much information about the book that we think as a librarian you're really going to love to hear. So without further ado, let's hear from Kevin. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you at the very end.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great privilege to introduce you to our distinguished guest, Kevin Young, the director of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture and poetry editor at The New Yorker. Kevin is widely regarded as one of the leading poets of his generation, formerly the curator of the Raymond Danowski Poetry Library at Emory University. His 11 books of poetry include Brown, Blue Laws, Selected and Uncollected Poems, longlisted for the National Book Award, Book of Hours, a finalist for the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award and winner of the Lenore Marshall Prize for Poetry from the Academy of American Poets, and Ardency, a chronicle of the Amistad Rebels, winner of an American Book Award. He has also edited the anthologies Blues Poems, Jazz Poems, and for Library of America, John Berriman Selected Poems. Kevin is here today to share and talk about his work on the landmark anthology African American Poetry, 250 Years of Struggle and Song, which will be published by Library of America in September. Kevin, welcome to Library Marketing Buzz, and thank you for joining us. We would love to hear a little bit more about the process of putting together this anthology.
Thanks for having me. Putting together the anthology was a privilege. It was a long process, but it was also really rewarding. I got to discover poets that I hope your listeners and readers and viewers can discover too. And I think there is a quality of discovery in an anthology like this. There's nearly 250 poets for each of the 250 years that are represented, and it goes from 1770 and Phyllis Wheatley to the present day. And that was one of the things I right away knew is I wanted to start with Wheatley, who's such a foundational figure and someone who wrote under extreme duress. She was enslaved in Boston, but she was also witness to the changes that built our nation. The American Revolution was raging in Boston around her. And I think that irony between her enslavement and her having to go to England, she physically went to England to meet with her patron to get her book published, and then having us, separating from England is a real poignant moment. And I think her writing is quite brave and powerful in that way. I'm really struck doing the book at sort of the ways that she engages a lot of the themes that emerge in the book, themes of history, themes of protest, in her case, not necessarily explicitly, but there's a lot of goddesses and gods referred to in the Greek who were very rebellious. There's also, like the subtitle says, a lot of struggle and song, both in her work and throughout. One of the things people, I think, tend to overlook about Wheatley is that she was not alone as a Black writer, though she's often represented that way in the tradition. She had connections to other Black people. Obor Tanner, a friend of hers, she has a poem to Scipio Moorhead, who's a Black artist. She says an African paint to SM, an African painter on seeing his works. And we think that's the person who painted who created the famous frontispiece, or the engraving that was based on a Moorhead image. And so there's a sense of community too in Wheatley, but also I hope in the entire book. There are people writing back to each other. There's people writing against each other. There's a real centuries-long conversation that's occurring between the pages of the book, and I think beyond. It really is. The hardest thing I think about doing the book was really cutting it down. It could have been twice as big, even though it's a big book already. And another early decision besides starting with Wheatley was where to end. And we really want to end as currently as possible. I wish I could have put all of the people that are in the kind of exciting Renaissance. There's far more poets writing now than ever, and I think that's an exciting thing. An anthology like this, we can't put all those people in there, but we can give a sense of the richness of that tradition. And what I was struck by was that, my generation, which used to be the youngest generation, is perhaps not anymore. There are younger writers than us, which is very exciting. And that's where you see this real blooming. But also you see the way that they're connected to this long tradition. And I see a lot of poems of protest, of anticipating the moment we're in when we're having, I think, the widest and biggest protests in American history. And I think a lot of that is foreshadowed in this poetry.
What other themes thread through the anthology, and could you speak to how the book is organized?
The book is organized really chronologically in generations. These are, inexact, but I really wanted to convey the sense of changes in history and chunks of time. The first section is chronological, moving from Wheatley to the present, mostly by publication, when people first started publishing and working. And because people were often writing, as I say in that section, to freedom, they're writing in freedom, they're writing about freedom, even though they're enslaved, they're writing their way out of freedom, like George Moses Horton attempted to. And I think that theme really runs through the whole book of freedom. But then the rest of the book is really in chronological chunks. The Harlem Renaissance section, which is called The Dark Tower, is really, I think, a rich one that shows the breadth of people like Langston Hughes and, County Cullen. But I was really focused on a lot of the women writers throughout history. And I really strove hard to try to get a kind of gender parity in the book and really explore all genders and see the ways that people have been writing all along. And, the Harlem Renaissance is a great site of that. But, there's a lot of, I got really into and geeked out on the kind of little things, like, should we put this poet in this section, even though some of their poems were 30 years before, but that's when they got famous. Things like that, which I think speak more to the challenges of putting together an anthology, but B, an anthology of Black poetry, which is really engaged with the fact that a lot of these poets weren't able to produce a book. A lot of the women poets, especially during the Harlem Renaissance, for instance, very few produced a book, though they wrote wonderful poems and certainly book-length manuscripts, and sometimes they couldn't get them published. And so I really there's an act of recovery in the anthology as much as it's of representation. And I think that's a really important theme. And I think the writers themselves write about that. They think about what it means that this person was forgotten, or they insist on remembering. And this insistence on remembering, I think, is a large part of African-American culture and memory and cultural history.
And would you be able to speak about your research and selection then a little bit more? What were
How long
some
do
of
we
the
have? I
biggest
mean, do we have 2 hours?
challenges?
Because I could certainly talk for 2 hours about the research. I tend to try to go back to the sources. There's a rich history of African American anthologies, and in the introduction, I talk a lot about things like James Weldon Johnson's 1922 anthology and a lot of the importance of that early anthology and cultural work. But I really was trying to go and get some of the poems from the books themselves, but sometimes even the magazines. But there's a lot of great writing, especially recovery around that, and some of that's represented, and I talk about in the introduction. But there was also a quality of just requesting books. Luckily, I was started the anthology when I was at Emory University, which has a really rich poetry library, and then I came to the Schomburg Center as its director, which has, of course, the best Black collection in the world. And to me, that was really symbolic of the poles of what the research required. So sometimes it was looking at manuscripts, but quite frankly, one of the richest resources is a resource we made in the Schomburg, I should say, in the 1990s, very early digital humanities project on 19th century women writers. And that large scale project, which is online, and the website's now been archived because it's so old, but it's so useful. And I was using it all the time to see the full range, because I think people will be surprised to see the rich 19th century holdings that are represented in the anthology itself. We kind of, even if we know of Wheatley, we kind of just fast forward to Paul Laurence Dunbar sometimes, and you really can see the rich writing, not always in English. Some Les Sanels, a group of Creole poets writing, published the first anthology in the 19th century of African-American poetry. And so there's a lot of things that were fun to track down, sometimes hard to track down, but that's part of the point. And I hope that the anthology only sends people on their own journeys back into doing that research. I think scouring the current landscape was also part of it. And luckily, being a poetry editor at the New Yorker, the poetry editor, I see a lot of poetry, and I feel like I was able to kind of at least see the landscape, though I couldn't represent every figure there.
Did you review, identify songs and poems in different other formats other than in print as well, like audio?
If only I could have done songs. I mean, there's luckily a number of anthologies of songs. Even when I did the Blues Poems anthology, which was the first anthology of just blues, I could only include a few songs there. But that is the reality of publishing. Both there's such a rich tradition of poets, and though they refer to song, I'm using song metaphorically. There are a couple songwriters who also were poets, Gil Scott-Heron being probably foremost among them, but he also published books and was interested on the page. And he stands in for a whole host of other writers, because of course there's the rich oral tradition of African-American poetry, but also African-American culture. So couldn't represent all of that. And I think many an anthology struggles with that question, but I think we came down on the right side of talking about it, and not being able to showcase all of it, but thinking about it out loud and helping you realize as a reader and a listener that there's this rich oral part of this. I mean, I would love to see some of the oral qualities of that be represented. We just couldn't do that in print. Another tradition that became really clear to me that is deserving of further notice is something like the Black children's verse, which is really extensive, precedes Langston Hughes, but Langston Hughes wrote it. There's many other writers, and especially now you see really powerful verse aimed at younger readers. And it's one of those things we just couldn't include that, but it's a whole other thing that I think is really exciting to think about. And a lot of the poets who are in the anthology also did write for children and younger people.
Mm. Could you speak a little bit about the current Renaissance and the Darkroom Collective?
Sure, yeah. I was in a group called the Darkroom Collective. We were based in Boston, and we're founded at the funeral of James Baldwin. And after that time, there was a pilgrimage down of some of the soon-to-be founders, and they declared, hey, we don't want another figure to die without us having met them, and founded this collective. And we went from hosting events, which I wasn't yet part of the group, but I did go to some of those events in the house they had in Cambridge, Mass. And then to writing our own work. And around then is when I joined, and we would tour around and gig around. And I think that some part of that, helped with the Renaissance. I'm not the person to say that, but others have said that. And I certainly think that we were really interested in connecting these generations, older generation. One of the keys of the reading series was having established writers read with emerging writers, who of course now are the established writers. I mean, I'm really happy that we gave the first Darkroom Poetry Prize to Yusef Komunyakaa, who went on to win the Pulitzer Prize and is just one of the greats, and Stop. And so I think that, there was this connection. And I think continuity is really important. You see it in this current moment, where I think a lot of the poets come out of collectives they themselves made. They might have come from Cave Canem. They might have come from somewhere very far away, Cave Canem being the most important, I think, of the workshops. But there's many other spaces that people have created. And I know, just from having been part of that and other spaces, that, if you need a space, you sometimes have to make it. And I hope that the anthology gestures towards some of those spaces and some of those other collectives, like the Black Took Collective, which is a great group of writers, and the Black Noise Collective. I mean, we could go on, but who are really doing interesting work in breaking down barriers and seeing the whole of poetry.
Would you be willing to read a poem from the collection?
Sure, yes. I was thinking of reading a poem by a poet you may not have heard of, but who I think is worth very much a big look. And give me 1 second here while I pull him up.
Thank you.
So this is a poet named Fenton Johnson. Fenton Johnson was a Chicago poet, and he wrote in many different forms. He wrote in spirituals, which we include in the anthology, and he wrote also in early prose poems. There's a little bit of debate, which is exciting, whether these are long lines or prose poems themselves. Either way, they're very experimental and free verse. Mind you, these are in the 19 teens, so over 100 years ago he was writing. And one of my favorite poems of his is probably his most famous, called Tired. And in it, he's thinking a lot about, I think a different kind of protest, a protest about existence and, as he said, civilization. And I think by civilization, he means society and its woes. And he is explicitly is writing about race and resistance. The other thing I would say about the poem is it's situated in the other prose poems. I really wanted to include all of them. He had a fire later on, and so these are the poems we have of his from this later period, but I want to preserve all of them in one place. This is called Tired. I'm tired of work. I'm tired of building up somebody else's civilization. Let us take a rest, Melissa Jane. I will go down to the Last Chance Saloon, drink a gallon or two of gin, shoot a game or two of dice, and sleep the rest of the night on one of Mike's barrels. You will let the old shanty go to rot, the white people's clothes turn to dust, and the Calvary Baptist Church sink to the bottomless pit. You will spend your days forgetting you married me, and your nights hunting the warm gin Mike serves the ladies in the rear of the Last Chance Saloon. Throw the children into the river. Civilization has given us too many. It is better to die than it is to grow up and find out that you are colored. Pluck the stars out of the heavens. The stars mark our destiny. The stars marked my destiny. I'm tired. of civilization.
Thank you so much for sharing this poem. And thank you for gathering together this magnificent chorus of voices.
Well,
The
it was a real pleasure and honor, and I think I'm always struck by, seeing it all together. You experience such a different thing than when you're looking at these little pieces of what becomes a bigger thing. But I think that's like the tradition itself. The tradition, there's such tremendous poets. I could have put, and I think I once tried to, 50, 60 pages of Langston Hughes or Gwendolyn Brooks and, Lucille Clifton. It would barely be enough. At the same time, I was struck by how the whole and the parts really add up to more and tell us something about where we are now. It's speaks with prophecy, with precision, and with a power that I think we really have to listen to. And so I hope people get a chance to enjoy that.
Thank you so much. The African American Poetry, 250 Years of Struggle Song will be published in September by Library of America. Thank you so much, Kevin Yam.
Thanks a lot.